Hello, everyone. It's Friday. It's Chat with Mac. We're glad to have you. We hope that you've had a great week. It's been a very busy week for us here. Nadeem, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great.
That's
It's
good.
it's gonna be it's gonna be a little noisy here. I've got some people around here, so it might get a little noisy, but we'll figure it out
We'll
as we
figure
go.
it out. So, um, like everything else, and I love these topics for Nadeem because Nadeem always has foresight as far as the future, just different trends as far as technology. Now, we're big on cloud services here, and what we really want to talk about is what does the future hold? What does the future look like as far as cloud service providers? So, Nadeem, the almighty sage, let's hear what you're thinking. As far as some of the changes or just some of the things you see on the horizon as far as cloud services are concerned.
So before I get into that, just for everybody, so if somebody hasn't been listening to us or listening to the news for that matter, this year has already been a extraordinary year because of two main things, and the pandemic is not one of them.
Thank goodness.
when it pertains to IT, there are two things that happened that make this year stand out, and that was the SolarWinds issue
Yeah.
and then the Exchange vulnerability. Two main things that are hitting customers. I mean, these are hitting government agencies. If government agencies can't control the fallout, how is a small business going to control the fallout?
Ooh, that's a good question.
So the thing is, normally we see that the small to medium sized space has a slightly better response than a huge entity or even a government agency. And the reason they have a slightly better response is because, number one, they're small, they're nimble, they can change direction very quickly. Number two, if they're a customer of ours, the process builds security in the services portfolio, so it's already built in. It's not like you have to kind of reinvent the wheel when it comes to security.
Right.
So it's already built in. But the problem is, even still, we want to always assume that there is going to be a breach, and that's what we work with. Is we always assume there's going to be a breach. Never assume that you are unbreachable, unhackable, because when you start assuming that, that's when bad things happen. I remember back in the day, I think it was Netscape, the CEO publicly said, "Oh yeah, our browser is unhackable." And what happened to Netscape?
They got hacked.
I mean, there are people who have never heard of Netscape. But the thing is, you want to make security part of your process. It cannot be an afterthought. So now, talk about cloud. When we talk about cloud, one of the main things that cloud brings to the table is technologies from efficiency perspective, from a security perspective, that are really not affordable to small business to implement on their own. They're very affordable when you go the cloud route. And that's the reason why a lot of companies are moving to the cloud. A lot of small businesses are moving to the cloud because it allows them to scale up or down. It gives them access to technology that otherwise will be unaffordable. I mean,
True.
Think about it. Just in the cloud, you can have a redundant router, a redundant scalable router that is automatically going to route traffic depending on where the outage is on the network. It is automatically going to route traffic based on what geographic region the traffic is coming from, so it gets that traffic to the closest node. Those kind of things are not affordable for small business to implement on their own. but cloud gives them access to that. What's going to happen in the small business space specifically, not the enterprise space, but the small business space specifically, is we are already seeing the change. Companies that just in the near past did not want to consider going to the cloud, and I can name some names off the top of my head, but these were companies that did not want to even consider having a server that the CEO cannot just walk up to and touch. And now they're like, Nadeem, we learned a lot. We need you to give us a path to migrate fully to the cloud by this date. And, all of a sudden, the mindset is changing. It's because why spend all that money? Let me put it in simple terms. Maybe it'll make more sense. Mm-hmm. When you buy a server, that is going to be able to handle your peak load, because you don't want things to slow down. So you buy a very powerful server to handle your peak load. You're paying for that peak load capacity. So you're paying for all that peak load capacity up front. When you go to the cloud, you're buying the server that only is going to sustain your current load, because when you hit peak load, you can automatically scale the server up or down. And that's where the beauty of cloud comes in, is that scalability. Because now you don't need to buy that expensive peak load hardware and have it sitting there almost idle most of the time, but only once or twice a year it hits that peak load. You're still paying for it. With the cloud, you can scale it and only pay when you use that peak load. So finally, decision makers, CEOs, and presidents are realizing that makes sense. In the old days, we used to think about, oh yeah, you're moving capex to opex, and forget all that. The little things, accessibility to technology, the scalability of the cloud, the resilience of the cloud. So these little things make such a huge difference when they're all together, that it is not feasible for a small business to implement themselves. I mean, even at PCSN, we use the cloud heavily. If we wanted to, we can implement all this technology at a data center ourselves. Yep. We have the resources, we have the experience, we have the capacity. The problem is it doesn't make a sense from a cost perspective. It is much cheaper for us to host it in the cloud somewhere and still be in full control of all the resources, as opposed to getting all the hardware to sustain that peak load and then paying for that hardware up front, but only using the peak capacity once or twice a year, if that. It just doesn't make sense. The other side of the equation is a lot of customers that we are seeing are seeing these dramatic shifts. There is a dramatic shift in multiple industries right now. Some industries, the growth is going through the roof. Some industries, it's falling out the bottom. The good thing about the cloud is that you can scale up and scale down as needed. You don't have to keep paying for that high-end peak resource, peak load resources. So that's the other side of the equation, that companies are now realizing that, hey, had we not purchased all this expensive hardware and gotten a loan to get this hardware, we could have scaled up and down as we needed and just pay to the provider. So that's that's what it ultimately comes down to, is scalability, access to technology, resilience, and then just a better experience for customers. Simple things like if your website, I mean, just as a rudimentary example, if your website is hosted in the cloud, you can use a content delivery network which will get customers that are on the other side of the world to a server that's closer to them, as opposed to the server on this side of the world. That's just a better experience for customers, faster, more responsive, less lag. Those things matter. And I think looking into the future for the SMB space, the small to medium market space, cloud is the way to go. Fortunately, there was a discussion earlier. I was in a group, and one of the things came up, which was how many Exchange servers are you running that got hit with that breach?
Yeah.
So hands started going up, and this was a virtual meeting, so virtual hands started going up, and we did a rough poll. On average, it was 3 Exchange servers per MSP that got hit, that got breached. Fortunately, we have no customers on Exchange. And I remember just a few years ago, pretty much all of our customers had Exchange in-house, and now it is none. Why? Because everybody's been moved to the cloud, Office 365.
Yep.
And if you are in Office 365, you don't have to worry about that breach. You're already protected. So we were already prepared ahead of time. And a lot of the MSPs out there who are still maintaining those expensive Exchange servers, they're kind of running around trying to put out fires. And I actually got a question from a customer of ours that did not know and wanted to make sure. It's like, hey, are we protected against this Exchange vulnerability? So this customer is in the finance industry, so of course security is top of mind. Yep. So he was like, hey, are we protected? And we were like, oh yeah, you're on Office 365. Don't worry about it. You're protected. Nothing to worry about, nothing to do. And so of course they didn't take my word for it. They looked it up, and they were like, oh wow, Nadeem, I really appreciate you guys looking out for us and showing us the path, which decision to make, because man, had we had that old Exchange server, we would be in a bind right now.
Yeah.
Because not only that you have to patch it, but their servers were older servers, so if it's a certain version or beyond a certain version, there may not be a fix for you. And you cannot upgrade a server on the fly. So like a vulnerability gets known, you can't just upgrade a server and expect it to be smooth without planning. It never goes that. I mean, even with planning, a lot of times migrations fail.
Yeah.
So, but no, the days of IT being an afterthought are gone. I think the days are here that the MSP, your IT provider, needs a seat at the table.
Absolutely.
The C-level executives.
Absolutely.
Because IT needs to get the facts and the information to the C-level to be able to make better decisions that impact everything. While this was a few years ago, I used to say that IT is the backbone of a company, of the business. And this is even more critical. So not only is IT the backbone, but IT has grown more nerves going into more organs now, that without IT, there is nothing. I mean, things would go back to the dark ages, really.
I mean, and it's crazy that you say that, because I can remember the beginnings, if you will, of just looking at the importance of IT. Like you say, back in the days, coming up, you saw everything was, for the young kids, they probably don't remember this. It went from floppy disk to 3/4 disk, and then 10 years later, it was the cloud thing. And I remember everyone was like, what the hell is the cloud? Who would have thought that, fast forward almost 15 years later, it has become such an integral part of day-to-day operations of pretty much every company. I mean, like you said, if anything, God forbid, but if anything was to go wrong, I mean, it would shut entire companies down. It actually, and it brings to light your role, as VCIO. I mean, it's such an important role to companies, because now they lean on you as that virtual chief. That's not right.
The chief information officer.
Thank you, chief information. They lean on you like, hey, Nadeem, what do we need to do if this happens? And I think it's such an important role, because a lot of companies, especially if you're a business owner, you wear so many hats. And then right. on top of you trying to be the IT guy, which when I make calls on a regular basis, I see that. They're not only the CEO, they're the IT guy. And I'm like, well, how are you wearing this many hats and making sure that you're running at the optimal? And the question is, they're not running optimal. They're doing a bare minimum. So,
Right, right.
yeah,
So not only that, but the VCI role is much more comprehensive.
yeah,
Not only do we have to kind of look at the technology to keep pace with the business, we have to make sure that the budgeting is there. We have to make sure that the security is there. We have to make sure that we can not only grow, but also that we can scale down as business slows down. When the pandemic hit, there were companies that had to scale down.
yep,
If you had painted yourself in a corner, not thinking about that, you would be in a bind because you would still have all these expenses and not have the income because your industry just got turned on its head all of a sudden.
yeah. Especially in the very profitable but fickle industries like oil and gas.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we are based out of Texas, and I understand. I mean, I think most people here understand. Texas is an oil economy, so there are certain things that we have to do, that we have to accommodate for, keeping that in mind. An economy, maybe up north will be very different than the Texas economy.
That's true.
It is what it is,
That's true.
But the thing is, the cloud, it's here to stay. Don't worry about the different types of cloud. Ultimately, the thing is going to be just the cloud, and probably for SMB, mostly the public cloud. It's not going to be hybrid. The hybrid is an interim migration path. It's an interim step. It's a stepping stone. The ultimate goal is public. Why public? Because number one, you can still carve out a virtual cloud and a public cloud to make it private and secure as you want it to be. But number two, the costs. You cannot touch the cost of a public cloud with a private or any other type of cloud out there. The cost does not make sense to build your own cloud when you can just pay pennies on the dollar for something that's already built. And that's what it boils down to. But anyway, so that's about the cloud. I think as for SMB, we're going to move to the public cloud. Most of our customers, well, all of our customers are using the cloud in some way, shape, or form. But going forward, their in-house compute capacity is going to end up moving into the cloud as well, which we are seeing a lot more uptake on now, especially this year, and with some of these vulnerabilities that we just found that are coming out. We're still reeling from the fallout of these vulnerabilities. I mean, we don't know the full extent of what all is impacted yet. That's still being worked on. But anyway, we'll call it a day with that.
Yes, sir.
Mac, you have a great day, and I'll see you next week.
Yes, sir. Everyone have a good one.
Everyone have a good one, and be safe out there.
All right. Bye.